All right, guys, today we're going over some freehand grinding tips. Come along with me and maybe you'll learn something. All right, guys, thanks for coming back to yet another video. The most asked question I get is, do I have any tips for freehand grinding? And I thought I kind of came up with a few, maybe 4, maybe 5, I don't know yet, some tips that have really helped me over the last couple years at just kind of stepping my game up just a little bit. So step number 1, have your equipment operating properly, okay? And maybe that's stupid or whatever. And I'm not saying you need to go out and buy a $3,000 grinder, okay? I'm saying if you're running a 1x30 grinder or maybe a more entry-level grinder, make sure it's working properly, okay? I've used some grinders in the past that when you go to maybe approach the grinder and you're starting to grind your bevel, maybe your tracking pushes the belt off a little bit to one side, and I think that's pretty common. Those kind of little things cause huge problems and inconsistencies in your grind. So that, I think, is almost the most important tip, is make sure that your equipment is operating properly and that you're using really good belts, okay? That's kind of part of all in the same little tip here, is use fresh belts. My belt progression when I'm grinding my bevels normally starts with a 36 and then up to an 80 and then a 120 and then a 220. Now that fresh 36 grip belt is very important, but as you get finer up and you really start to make sure that you're getting everything even and clean and crisp, those really fresh, sharp belts make a huge difference. So if you're grinding your bevel and you're not having the results that you want, put on a fresh belt. I don't know how many times that has totally changed the way my bevel ends up looking. Tip number 2, I like to use a file guide, okay? Some people say, oh, if you're using a file guide, it's not freehand grinding. Well, whatever, I don't care really. Whatever you want to say is fine, okay? I like to use this little guide, and this is one I made just out of some 01 tool steel. You can buy these as well. They're not that much money, but the reason I like to use these a lot of times is it gives you a really permanent stop to where when you're, let me see if I can kind of show you guys really quick. If you approach the grinder, you've got this really good stop that hits your platen, okay? You'll never go past that point. You'll never ruin your plunge and bring it back too far. Everything will stay consistent and even because you've already got enough stuff to worry about as far as your edge thickness, you know, where your bevel's coming up to, keeping everything straight. When you have that consistent stopping point, it really helps me out a lot, at least. And it also kind of gives you something to hang on to. Like when you approach the grinder, I think I'm going to change where the camera's at so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So when you approach the grinder and you have this file guide on here, it kind of gives you something to keep your fingers on a little bit. Like if you come up to the grinder and you're going to grind a big fillet knife, which maybe isn't the best thing to show you guys, but it gives you something to hold on to that's a little more secure. And like I said, it gives you that permanent stopping point to where you're never going to bring your belt over too far. You're never going to push past it. You've got this stopping point. So you've always got a nice crispy plunge line, okay? That's a really good tip that's helped me out a lot. All right, tip number 3, when you are grinding your bevels, okay, and say you're not doing a full flat grind, okay? We're not talking about full flat grinds right now really because that is a lot simpler. Pressure is super important, okay? When you're on the grinder and you're trying to get things good and even, okay? You're coming across like this or whatever, and you realize maybe you've got a low spot right here, okay? And what you'll realize is how you hold the blade, okay, in and out like this, and as you come across, how much up and down like this pressure you're applying is super key, okay? And it's taken a long time to get to where you understand where you need to apply pressure to fix certain problems with your bevels as you're grinding, okay? A lot of this is done more in that 120 grit range. Your 36 grit, you're really kind of just hogging out that material and getting it close. But once you get up into those 80s, the 120s, that pressure is super, super important. It's amazing how you can kind of look past it and just grind, but you're not going to get consistent results until you understand where to apply pressure at on the blade, on that platen to correct what's not looking right, I guess would be a good way to put it. So that's super important. You're coming across, maybe it's low, you want to maybe put a little more pressure with your thumb like that, or maybe you're just going to tweak it a little bit. And that's something, like I said, it just comes with practice. Really take the time to understand what's causing the problem in your bevels, as opposed to just getting mad and frustrated. Try to learn while you're doing it and understand what little tweak you're doing kind of changes how that end result is. All right, tip number 4, you guys, is to make sure you have your center scribe line. Well, you can't even really see it in this video, so it's not very good, but make sure you have that center scribe line done before you start grinding your bevels, okay? And there's a lot of different ways to do it. Some people use a drill bit. There's a lot of other stuff on there, but make sure you have a good center scribe line to where when you're grinding that knife, you can see it really good. You know how close you're getting to that edge. And because you've kind of got a couple things to worry about when you're grinding. You've got to pay attention to your edge thickness the whole time. And you also have to pay attention to how high up your bevels are going, okay? So like for me, I'll rough in aggressively, 36 grit belt, maybe bring the edge to 40 thousandths, maybe something like that. And then every belt progression from there, I'm bringing that edge down a little bit further until you get it to your final finish, whether it's 10 thousandths or 20 thousandths, whatever it is. And what I like to do is if I have my rough grind done with a 36 and I move to an 80, I'm going to immediately bring that 80 and get my edge a little bit thinner. It's kind of hard to explain, but get my edge thinner with every belt progression. So I immediately get my edge where I want it with that grit, and then I work my bevel up a little bit higher, or I crisp up that line that the 36 grit made with the 80, and then up all the way to the 240. So if I'm at a 240, I'm immediately going to the grinder, I'm getting my edge thickness to my final thickness, okay? And then all the way down, and then once that's done, once my edge is done, I slowly work up, and just by applying different pressure, you're pulling your pressure away from the edge up to the top of that bevel, and you're cleaning up that top line of the bevel, okay? So it's kind of hard to explain, but I'm sure you guys, if you've tried it, you know that maybe you're trying to crisp up your bevel, halfway up, and you realize that your edge got too thin. And it's a lot of how you're applying pressure. If your edge is final thickness, keep it tilted down. You need to tilt it back. Not that aggressive, obviously, but just keep your pressure away from the edge so you're not getting your edge too thin, okay? Super key, super important. And for the last tip, you guys might think this is silly. Confidence, okay? There's days that I go out into the shop and I know I have some knives I have to grind. And this is primarily with like my Trekker model or knives that do not have full flat grinds, okay? Maybe a Bushman or something like that. And I just don't have the head, my head's just not in it that day, and I don't do it, okay? Because I don't know how to explain it, but there's certain days where maybe you're not as confident, you're not feeling doing those kind of grinds. And don't do them on those days, you know what I mean? Because you're just gonna get frustrated, and do something else those days. Do flat grinds or something that's more, maybe some handle work or whatever. But that's something that I've learned is if you guys follow me over on Instagram, which I think a lot of you guys do, my Trekker H, Trekker Minimalist, all those knives get normal grinds as far as they're not full flat grinds. They have to be super even. They take a lot of focus, every single one. And I've done, I don't know, maybe 150 or 200 of those knives. And there's days where I can come out here in the shop and I can do 10 or 15 of them as far as the grinding portion of them and get them done. And I'm super stoked. They look great. And there's other days where I have that planned out to do it. I'll start doing one, and I just immediately am like, okay, today's not the day to be grinding these bevels. So maybe that's weird. Maybe you guys have kind of experienced that as well. But it's something that I think is super, super important, is if you're not feeling it that day, don't do it. So I think that covers a few of the main little tips that I have picked up along the way that have helped me grow and just create better freehand bevels, okay? I am not one of those guys that's like, oh, if you're not freehand grinding, you know, you suck or whatever like that. I'm not that way at all. If you guys have seen some of my recent videos, I did pick up one of those OBM bevel jigs. And as of right now, I'm kind of learning how to use it and learning how to kind of make it a tool in my arsenal that helps me get better. And as of right now, I'm only grinding one of my models with it. Everything else is freehand. I think that those jigs are a super good way to learn, super good way to start understanding belt progression, and I recommend them for everybody. For me, I started out freehand grinding and then I moved to using a jig, so that was a little bit of a different transition. But if you guys are just getting started in knife making, maybe pick up a bevel jig, start using that, and transition to freehand grinding when you're comfortable. If you guys have any other tips, maybe that I didn't cover, that have helped you, drop them in the comments below. I am always trying to learn, always trying to get better at what I'm doing. And as far as the grinder and stuff that I use, like I said in that first tip, I think that having good quality tools does make a difference, okay? When I upgraded from 2x42 and went to a 2x72, my grinds got better. There's no question about it. And a lot of it is being able to control the speed. You know, this is a really heavy machine. It's super solid. The tracking's really solid on it. This is a KMG TX, in case you guys were wondering. But there's a lot of really good budget 2x72s as well that you can get for less than $1,000, and they're just a great investment if you plan on taking this knife making thing to where it's going to make you a little bit of money. You know, it's definitely worth the investment. So that being said, I hope you guys learned something from this video. I hope that you guys have some tips for me. And if you like this video, make sure you subscribe. Check out all my other videos. I've got a ton of videos covering a lot of super detailed knife making stuff. So like always, guys, thanks for watching.